A morning hike, a happy dog. The crisp morning air, still carrying the faint scent of yesterday's rain, invigorated Arthur Henderson as he stepped onto the familiar forest path. Beside him, Lily, a golden retriever with a permanent twinkle in her intelligent brown eyes, practically vibrated with anticipation. Her tail, a golden blur, thumped an enthusiastic rhythm against his leg, a silent countdown to her release. "All right, girl, go on," Arthur chuckled, unsnapping the leash. With a joyful bark that echoed briefly through the quiet woods, Lily launched herself forward. She wasn't simply running, she was an embodiment of pure, unadulterated canine joy. Her powerful legs propelled her over gnarled roots and around moss-covered boulders, her nose twitching as she catalogued the morning's olfactory symphony. Damp earth, pine needles, a distant deer, and the tantalizing, elusive scent of a squirrel. She veered off the main trail for a moment, her golden fur a fleeting flash between the dark trunks of ancient oaks, before reappearing 100 yards ahead, looking back with an expectant, playful pant. Arthur watched her, a warm smile creasing his weathered face. This was their ritual, their morning communion with nature. For decades, he'd taught children about the delicate balance of the natural world, fostering in them a respect for its quiet majesty. Now, in his retirement, these walks with Lily were his own classroom, a continuous lesson in simple contentment. He adjusted the brim of his worn canvas hat and continued his steady pace, the rhythmic crunch of his boots on the gravel path a soothing counterpoint to the chirping birds overhead. The early morning sun, still low in the sky, dappled through the leaves, painting shifting patterns of light and shadow on the forest floor. A gentle breeze rustled the canopy, a whispered secret shared between the trees. Lily, in her exuberance, often disappeared from view, only to reappear moments later, her tongue lolling out, a stick clutched proudly in her jaws, which she would then drop at his feet with a soft whine, an invitation to a game of fetch. Arthur would oblige, tossing the stick a short distance, delighting in her immediate, powerful chase. He preferred the slower pace, the chance to observe a nuthatch spiralling down a tree trunk, or a spider's dew-kissed web strung between branches like a tiny, sparkling tapestry. But he never denied Lily her boundless energy. It was infectious, a constant reminder of the simple beauty of being alive. Today, however, Lily seemed particularly animated. After a particularly spirited game of fetch, where she'd brought him a surprisingly large fallen branch, she didn't immediately return to his side. Instead, she bounded off to the right, a direction they rarely took. Arthur paused, his brow furrowing slightly. "Lily? Where are you going, girl?" he called out, his voice a gentle inquiry rather than a command. He heard her distinctive bark, but it wasn't her usual playful yelp. There was an urgency to it, a higher pitch that snagged at something in Arthur's memory. He started to follow, picking up his pace, a faint unease stirring within him. He trusted Lily implicitly. She wasn't prone to chasing wildlife or getting into trouble. Her focused barks continued, leading him deeper into a denser part of the woods, where the canopy overhead grew thick and the path became indistinct. He pushed through a curtain of low-hanging ferns, his eyes scanning for her golden form. Then he saw her. She was standing beside a massive, ancient oak, or what was left of it. A recent storm had clearly toppled it, and the sheer size of the trunk was impressive, its roots torn violently from the earth, now pointing skyward like petrified tentacles. Lily was pawing frantically at a section of the trunk, her body pressed against the rough bark, her tail no longer wagging, but held stiffly, almost vibrating with intensity. She let out a series of short, sharp whines, her gaze fixed on the fallen tree. "Lily, what is it?" Arthur asked, approaching cautiously. He knelt beside her, placing a hand on her quivering flank. He expected to see a squirrel, perhaps a rabbit, trapped or injured. But there was nothing immediately visible. Lily, however, continued to nudge and whine at a particular fissure in the dark, decaying wood. Her nose pressed against it. Her ears were flattened, her whole posture one of intense, unwavering focus. Arthur leaned closer, peering into the dark crevice. He could hear a faint scratching sound, almost imperceptible, beneath the morning chorus of birds. It was too small for a squirrel, too delicate. He put his ear against the rough bark, and the faint sounds became clearer. Tiny, desperate squeaks, muffled, but undeniably alive. Lily looked up at him, her eyes wide and pleading, then back at the crack in the tree, as if urging him to understand, to do something. Her happy energy from the start of their day had been completely subsumed by this new, urgent purpose. She was no longer a playful dog on a morning stroll. She was a sentinel, a protector. Her loyalty now extended to something small and unseen within the heart of the fallen giant. "Little ones," Arthur murmured, a dawning realization spreading across his face. "You found some little ones, didn't you, girl?" He gently patted Lily's head, his hand resting on the soft fur of her neck. He looked around, assessing the situation. The trunk was massive, heavy, but the crack seemed to lead into a hollow. He needed to be careful. He looked at Lily, whose gaze remained fixed on the tree, her whole being radiating an unwavering concern. She had led him here, and now she waited, trusting him to understand her silent plea. The peaceful morning had taken an unexpected turn, and Arthur, guided by his faithful companion, knew exactly what he had to do. The unexpected detour. The crisp morning air, usually a balm to Arthur's spirit, now held a hint of unease. Lily, trotting a comfortable pace ahead, suddenly tensed. Her golden fur, usually shimmering with careless joy, bristled slightly along her spine. A low, almost imperceptible whine rumbled deep in her chest, a sound Arthur hadn't heard from her in years, not since she'd cornered a grumpy badger in his prize-winning dahlias. "What is it, girl?" Arthur chuckled, assuming a squirrel had dared to taunt her from a safe branch. He tightened his grip on her leash, though it hung slack. Lily, however, had other plans. With a sudden burst of energy that belied her years, she veered sharply to the left, pulling the leash taut in his hand, almost yanking him off his feet. "Lily, no! Stay on the path!" Arthur called out, his voice a mixture of surprise and mild annoyance. He braced himself, expecting the familiar tug-of-war that usually ensued when she spotted a rabbit or a particularly interesting patch of mud. But this was different. Lily wasn't merely pulling, she was driven. Her powerful legs churned, dragging him off the well-worn dirt track and into the denser undergrowth. Twigs snapped under his hiking boots, and stray branches whipped at his trousers. "Lily, come back!" he commanded again, his tone sterner this time, though he knew it was a futile effort. Her ears, usually perked for his every word, were flattened against her head, her focus singular and unwavering. She wasn't just chasing, she was on a mission, grumbled, a long-suffering sigh escaping his lips. Honestly, girl, what's gotten into you? We're going to be late for our tea. He knew it was pointless to argue with a golden retriever with a mission. He'd learned that lesson years ago, when she'd once spent an entire afternoon attempting to rescue a particularly stubborn garden gnome from his neighbour's yard. Still, the deviation was unsettling. Their morning walk was a ritual, a comforting predictability that started his day. Now, Lily had shattered that routine with the force of a small, furry bulldozer. She continued to pull, her pace undiminished, leading him deeper into a less frequented section of the woods. The familiar scent of pine and damp earth was now mixed with a subtle, unfamiliar musk. The light filtering through the canopy grew dappled and dim, the path giving way to tangled roots and decaying leaves. Arthur stumbled over a gnarled root, nearly losing his footing. "Watch it, Lily! What are you even looking for?" His question was met with another low whine, more insistent this time, a plea rather than a playful growl. She wasn't slowing down, but her head swiveled from side to side, as if searching for a landmark. Then she fixed her gaze on something ahead, a dark mass looming through the trees. It was a behemoth, a fallen oak, its colossal trunk stretched across the forest floor like a defeated giant. It must have been brought down by the last severe storm, its root ball a tangled snarl of earth and broken timber, reaching skyward like a skeletal hand. As they drew closer, Lily's pace quickened even further, a frantic desperation entering her gait. Her powerful body strained against the leash, her paws scrabbling at the uneven ground. She whined again, a louder, more distressed sound this time, her whole body vibrating with urgency. She wasn't interested in sniffing the base of the tree or circling it playfully. Instead, she made a direct beeline for a specific point along its massive, fractured trunk. She reached it, then began to paw at the rough bark, her whines escalating into a series of short, sharp barks, punctuated by frantic sniffs. Her tail, usually a cheerful flag, was now tucked low, twitching with an agitation that was almost painful to witness. Arthur, catching up, saw it then. Not a squirrel, not a badger, but a small, dark crevice in the side of the fallen oak, barely visible against the rough bark. From within it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound reached his ears. A series of tiny, desperate squeaks, like the sound of rustling leaves, but imbued with a fragile, living distress. Lily was no longer just barking. She was nudging the crevice with her nose, her eyes wide and pleading, darting from the dark opening to Arthur's face. She looked at him with an intensity that transcended mere canine communication, an urgent plea that resonated deep within his own compassionate nature. She wasn't just showing him something, she was telling him, with every fibre of her being, that something was profoundly wrong. A persistent plea. Arthur, still a little bewildered by Lily's sudden detour, continued along the worn path, his worn hiking boots crunching softly on the fallen leaves. He expected her golden fur to appear any moment, bounding back to his side with a playful bark, perhaps a stick clutched proudly in her jaws. The air, crisp and carrying the scent of damp earth and pine usually invigorated him, but a faint unease now gnawed at the edges of his calm. He rounded the bend, the familiar old oak, a landmark on their usual route, now visible in the distance. He whistled, a low, drawn-out sound that always brought Lily trotting. Silence. Only the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze answered him. A slow frown creased Arthur's brow. This wasn't like Lily. She was a creature of habit, and her morning explorations, while energetic, rarely strayed far from his sight. He paused, hands resting on his hips, and scanned the dappled woods. Nothing. He called her name, a little louder this time, his voice carrying through the quiet forest. Still, no golden flash, no excited panting. A flicker of concern, cold and sharp, began to spread through him. Had she found a rabbit? A deer? Even then, she usually returned quickly, eager for praise. Just as he was about to turn back, a familiar nudge brushed his hand. He looked down to see Lily, her golden fur matted with twigs and damp soil, her usually bright eyes clouded with a frantic urgency he'd never witnessed. Her wet nose pressed firmly against his palm. Then she let out a soft whimper, a sound of deep distress that tugged at his heart. She didn't wag her tail. Instead, her entire body seemed coiled with tension, her ears flattened slightly against her head. "Lilybug, what's wrong?" he murmured, kneeling to her level, concern washing over him. He reached out to stroke her head, but she sidestepped his touch, her focus elsewhere. Her gaze was fixed, not on him, but over his shoulder, back towards the direction they had just come from, back towards the fallen oak. A low, continuous whine rumbled in her chest, a sound of profound worry. She nudged his hand again, harder this time, then turned her head, looking directly at the distant, fallen tree. Her eyes, wide and pleading, were filled with an almost human anxiety. She took a step back, then another, her gaze unwavering, clearly trying to draw him away from the path. When he didn't immediately follow, she let out another sharp whimper, a sound that pierced the morning's tranquility. Then, with a sudden, decisive movement, she clamped her jaws gently around the cuff of his hiking pant leg. She didn't pull hard enough to hurt, but with an insistent, unyielding pressure, she tugged. Her tail, usually a blur of golden happiness, remained still, only the tip quivering slightly with the intensity of her plea. She looked back at the fallen oak again, her worried eyes conveying a silent message as clear as any spoken word. "We have to go back. Something is terribly wrong." Arthur straightened up, his earlier annoyance replaced by a growing sense of dread. Lily wasn't playing. This was serious. Her distress was palpable, a tight knot in the air between them. He had seen her excited, playful, even mischievous, but never like this, so singularly focused, so utterly compelled. He knew, with a certainty that bypassed logic, that whatever had captured her attention at that fallen tree demanded their return. His routine, his expectations, faded into insignificance beside the undeniable urgency in his loyal companion's eyes. He took a step, then another, allowing Lily to guide him, her grip on his pant leg still firm, her soft whimpers guiding him further into the woods, back towards the mysterious whispers hidden within the old oak. Following the leader, Arthur sighed, the sound a gust through his neatly trimmed moustache. Lily, usually so placid, was a whirlwind of motion, her muzzle nudging his hand, then darting towards the path, a low, insistent whimper rumbling in her chest. All right, old girl," he muttered, more to himself than to the dog. "No need to make such a fuss." He was still smarting from the abrupt interruption to his morning tea and the unsettling quiet that had preceded her frantic return. Wouldn't stray. Her tail, usually a lazy, wouldn't stray. Her tail, usually a lazy pendulum, was now a quivering question mark, sweeping the air with an almost desperate rhythm. He followed, his sturdy walking boots crunching on the gravel path that wound through the denser part of the woods. The air, still cool from the morning, carried the scent of damp earth and pine needles, a familiar comfort that today felt tinged with an unfamiliar urgency. "What's got into you, girl?" he murmured, his voice a low rumble against the rustling leaves. Lily responded with another sharp whine, tugging harder on the leash. Her eyes, usually soft and brown, now wide and fixed on some unseen point ahead. He allowed himself to be pulled, his brow furrowed in a mixture of mild irritation and growing curiosity. He'd never seen Lily quite like this. Not even the time she'd cornered a particularly plump badger had elicited such a sustained display of distress. He tried to decipher the invisible tapestry of sense that must be guiding her. Was it a deer, injured and vulnerable? A fox, perhaps, with a litter of kits? He knew Lily's nose was unparalleled, a finely tuned instrument for detecting the subtle shifts in the forest's olfactory narrative. But this wasn't the scent of prey, not the excited tremor of a hunt. This was something different, something imbued with a raw, undeniable plea. The path narrowed, giving way to a less trodden track, overgrown with ferns and brambles. Sunlight dappled through the canopy, painting shifting patterns on the forest floor. He recognized this stretch. It led directly towards the massive oak that had toppled during the last winter storm, its gnarled roots torn from the earth like a giant's grasping hand. He remembered seeing it on his last walk, a monument to nature's sudden, brutal power. She whined again, a higher-pitched sound. She whined again, a higher-pitched sound this time, and then, with a sharp, almost frantic jerk, she pulled away from his grasp. The leash slipped through his fingers, and she bounded forward, a blur of golden fur disappearing around a thick stand of hazel. "Lily, wait!" Arthur called, a note of alarm in his voice. He quickened his own steps, pushing through the undergrowth, his mind racing. Had she finally caught a scent that overwhelmed her training? Was she about to get into trouble? He rounded the bend, his gaze sweeping the clearing where the fallen oak lay. And there she was, not in pursuit of some wild creature, but standing at the base of the colossal trunk, her front paws scrabbling at the rough bark. A low, continuous whine issued from her, a sound of profound anxiety. At him, her eyes pleading, then returned. At him, her eyes pleading, then returned her attention to the hollow trunk, scratching with renewed vigour, a small whimper escaping her lips. He approached cautiously, his heart thudding a little faster now. The air around the fallen tree felt different, charged with an unseen presence. He knelt beside Lily, placing a hand on her quivering flank. "What is it, girl?" he whispered, his voice hushed. He leaned closer, trying to discern what had so captivated his normally stoic companion. A faint, almost imperceptible sound reached his ears. A tiny, distressed squeaking, emanating from deep within the hollowed-out trunk. It was barely audible, a fragile whisper against the vast silence of the woods. Lily nudged him again, her gaze unwavering, her message clear. Help them. The scratching and whining. The familiar thud of Lily's paws, usually a soothing rhythm against the forest floor, now drummed with desperate haste, pulling Arthur deeper into the encroaching woods. Her gentle, persistent whine, a constant undercurrent since leaving the cabin, had sharpened into distressed yelps. This wasn't the sound of playful exuberance or a territorial warning. It was a raw, almost pleading cry, resonating with a palpable fear Arthur rarely, if ever, heard from his usually composed companion. As the gnarled silhouette of a fallen oak materialized, a dark, sprawling leviathan against the dappled sunlight, Lily's agitation surged. She didn't falter, didn't hesitate. Her sleek black form, typically so graceful, moved with singular, frantic purpose. She circled the colossal trunk once, a blur of fur and agitated energy. Her tail, usually a steady pendulum of contentment, now tucked low, twitching erratically. Her yelps grew louder, each sharp jab a blow to Arthur's chest. He quickened his pace, breath snagging in his throat, struggling to keep up. The air, already thick with the damp scent of decaying leaves and rich earth, now carried a subtle, almost imperceptible tang that prickled the fine hairs on his arms. He couldn't quite identify it, but it deepened the unsettling atmosphere. Lily, abandoning her circling, planted herself squarely before a gaping, irregular crack in the oak's bark. It wasn't a clean fracture, but a jagged tear, revealing the ancient tree's dark, hollow interior. Here, her whining reached a fever pitch, a continuous, high-pitched lament that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. Then, with a sudden, frenzied burst of energy, she began to scratch. Her front paws, usually precise and gentle when excavating garden treasures, became furious demolition tools. Claws raked against the rough bark, sending splinters flying. Each scrape, a harsh, grating sound tearing through the forest's quiet. She didn't merely scratch, she attacked the opening, her entire body trembling with effort, her snout nudging at the dark fissure as if attempting to force entry. A low, guttural growl rumbled in her chest, a primal sound of frustration and desperation. Arthur watched, mesmerized and deeply troubled. He'd known Lily for years, through every mood and season, but this was entirely new. Her typical reaction to a potential burrow was curious sniffing, perhaps a tentative paw, never this violent, unwavering agitation. There was no joy in her movements, no playful anticipation of a chase. This was pure, unadulterated distress, aimed with laser-like precision at that dark, uninviting void. He knelt beside her, his hand hovering uncertainly over her quivering flank. "Lily?" he murmured, his voice soft, almost lost amidst her desperate cries. "What is it, girl?" She didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge his presence. Her focus remained solely on the crack, nose twitching, ears flattened. A faint, almost imperceptible squeak seemed to emanate from the shadowy depths, a sound so tiny, so fragile, Arthur almost dismissed it as a trick of the wind. But then it came again, a little louder, more insistent, and Lily's scratching redoubled. He leaned closer, peering into the gloom. The crack was narrow, barely wide enough for his hand, yet it plunged into an unknown darkness. The faint squeaking was undeniably real now, a chorus of tiny, distressed sounds. It tugged at something deep within him, a memory of a lost bird fallen from its nest, a forgotten kitten mewling in the cold. It was the sound of vulnerability, a plea for help. Lily nudged his arm with her wet nose, her wide, pleading eyes locking onto his. There was an unspoken command in their depths, a silent imploration that transcended language. Do something, they seemed to say. They need help. Arthur felt a chill, unrelated to the crisp autumn air. Lily wasn't just showing him something, she was telling him something. And whatever it was trapped, and it was in danger. His initial reluctance, his desire to simply return to the warmth of his cabin and the comfort of his routine, began to evaporate, replaced by a growing sense of responsibility. Lily, his steadfast, gentle companion, was now his guide, leading him into an unknown plight, her unwavering conviction pulling him deeper into the heart of the forest and toward a crisis he was only just beginning to comprehend. The rhythmic scratching continued, a drumbeat of urgency against the silent, watchful trees. A puzzling crack. Arthur, still reeling from Lily's uncharacteristic outburst, sank onto the damp earth. The scent of decaying leaves and churned soil, a familiar forest aroma, now carried an unfamiliar urgency. His knees creaked in protest as the cool, moist ground seeped through his trousers. He peered into the shadowy aperture Lily had indicated, a jagged fissure in the gnarled bark of the fallen oak. This wasn't a clean break, but a splintered rip, dark and forbidding. "All right, girl, I'm looking," he rumbled, his voice low. He squinted, attempting to penetrate the gloom within the crevice. At first, he saw nothing, just the rough, dark grain of the wood, scattered fibres, and an impenetrable blackness that seemed to swallow the afternoon's fading light. He traced a cautious finger along the splintered edge, noting its sharp, brittle texture. Old, he thought, this break, not fresh. Lily, however, was far from satisfied, a surprisingly forceful push that nearly unbalanced him. Her breath, warm and panting, contrasted sharply with the cool air. He flinched, turning slightly. Her intelligent, dark eyes darted from the crack to him, then back, an insistent, wordless plea. "I see nothing, Lily," he reiterated, his voice softening. "It's just wood." He gestured vaguely at the unyielding darkness. He felt a little foolish, humouring his dog like this. Perhaps she'd scented a mouse or shrew, something small burrowing into the tree. But Lily's persistent agitation felt different, more profound than a simple hunting instinct. As if to refute his dismissal, Lily barked sharply, startling a nearby robin into flight. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, she began digging at the loose earth directly beneath the crack. Her paws moved with furious determination, sending clods of damp soil flying. The earthy scent intensified, mingling with the faint, sweet smell of decaying wood. She whined as she dug, a frustrated, impatient sound, her tail lashing back and forth with a nervous energy that vibrated through the very air. Arthur watched her, a slow understanding dawning. She wasn't merely trying to get at something. She was trying to get to something. And if the crack offered no passage, she'd forge another way. He leaned closer, pressing his face almost to the splintered opening, trying to block out the remaining ambient light and focus on the internal darkness. He held his breath, straining his ears. The forest hummed with its usual symphony of rustling leaves, chirping birds, and distant insects. But beneath it all, he thought he detected something else. A faint, almost imperceptible sound. A tiny, reedy squeak, barely audible above Lily's frantic digging. He froze, his heart giving a small, unexpected lurch. He tried to pinpoint the sound, to distinguish it from the creaks and groans of the settling tree. So faint, so delicate, it could have been imagination, a trick of the wind or the blood rushing in his ears. But then Lily paused her frantic digging, ears swivelling, head tilted, listening. Her tail stilled, her entire body tensed, and she let out another soft, insistent whine, her gaze locked on the crack. Arthur's hand instinctively reached for the rough bark, his fingers tracing the jagged outline. The squeak came again, a little clearer this time, then another, followed by a faint rustle, like something small shifting inside. It wasn't a mouse. It wasn't a shrew. This sound was different, vulnerable, needy. A knot formed in Arthur's stomach. He pushed his face even closer, trying to pierce the absolute blackness. He felt the cold, damp wood against his cheek. Lily nudged his arm, then pressed her nose against the crack, her breath puffing out in short, anxious bursts. She didn't just want him to look, she wanted him to comprehend. And in that moment, as the faint, almost unheard cries intensified, Arthur felt a creeping sense of unease. Something alive was in there, something small and undeniably trapped. And Lily, with her unwavering certainty, had known it all along. The faint squeaks. A cool breath of wind, redolent with damp earth and pine, ruffled Mr. Henderson's sparse hair. He remained kneeling, knees mildly protesting the forest floor, his focus now sharpened beyond the oak's jagged fissure. It was fixed on something far more delicate, almost imperceptible, yet insistent enough to pierce the wood's ambient hum. A sound. It was nearly swallowed by the high rustle of leaves, a mere whisper against a distant crow's caw. Not a chirp, nor a bark, but utterly distinct. A tiny, high-pitched plea, like a dollhouse hinge's rusty squeak, quickly stifled, then, after a brief pause, repeated. Mr. Henderson froze. His hands, caked with soil from where he'd braced himself, rested on the bark. His brow furrowed in concentration, head subtly cocked. He squeezed his eyes shut for a second, attempting to filter out his own breathing, the pulse in his ears, the forest's gentle sigh. He reopened them, gaze locked on the dark crevice. Had he imagined it? The sound was so faint, so fragile, it could have been a trick of the wind, a figment of an overactive mind. But then it came again. A little stronger this time, imbued with a fragile urgency. A succession of tiny, desperate squeaks, overlapping slightly, like miniature instruments tuning for a heartbreaking symphony. It was undeniably present, echoing from within the fallen tree's deep, shadowed cavity. Lily, who had been observing his face with an almost human intensity, seemed to register the shift in his awareness. Her frantic digging had ceased, paws now resting on the rough bark inches from his hand. Her body, previously a coiled spring of agitation, held a new kind of tension, one of hopeful anticipation. Her tail, which had been thrashing wildly moments before, now delivered a series of softer, more measured thumps against the leaf litter, a quiet rhythm of affirmation. Her dark eyes, usually bright with playful mischief, were wide and focused, conveying a profound message. "You hear it now, don't you? I told you." Mr. Henderson stayed motionless, his ear practically pressed against the cool, damp wood. The scent of decaying timber filled his nostrils, earthy and rich. The squeaks were undeniably real, no longer phantom. They were undeniably alive, and undeniably small. Far too small for a squirrel, he initially thought, then corrected himself. A very, very young squirrel, perhaps, or something even tinier. His mind, which had stubbornly clung to mundane explanations of Lily chasing a rabbit or a tenacious beetle, now replayed the dog's earlier, frantic behaviour in a new light. Her desperate whining, her relentless pushing against the log, the way she'd nudged him so insistently towards this specific spot. It hadn't been an attempt to play. It had been an appeal, a cry for help translated through canine urgency. A sharp, unwelcome pang of guilt pricked at him. He had been so slow, so dismissive. He treated her instincts as mere animal caprice, when all along she had been trying to convey something vital, something that now, with each tiny, heartbreaking squeak, revealed itself to be a matter of life or death for whatever lay trapped within. Lily nudged his arm gently with her wet nose, a soft, encouraging push. Her tail quickened its tempo slightly, a hopeful cadence, tracing the soft fur behind her ears. "I hear it, girl," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "I hear it." The words felt inadequate, a poor acknowledgement of her tireless efforts, but even as he spoke, a new resolve began to knit within him. The faint squeaks, once a source of confusion, were now a clear directive. He had to extricate whatever was in there, and Lily, his faithful, perceptive Lily, had shown him the way. The question was no longer if, but how. The crack was narrow, the wood thick and unyielding, and time, he suspected, was not on their side. A tiny, trapped family. Arthur knelt, the oak's rough bark a cold press against his trousers. Beside him, Lily sat silent, her intelligent gaze shuttling from his face to the fallen trunk, a wordless command. The faint squeaks, whispers amidst the rustling leaves, solidified his dawning certainty. This was no trick of the wind, no phantom born of guilt. Life stirred within, small and desperate. He extended a tentative hand, fingers grazing loose splinters and the damp moss clinging to the jagged fissure. The wood yielded softly in spots, a testament to the tree's long repose. He recalled the tempestuous storm of a few nights prior, a violent thrashing that had stripped the valley of older, weaker sentinels. Then, cocooned in his cottage, the rain's rhythmic patter had been a soothing balm. Now, a prickle of shame. How many other unseen repercussions had that storm unleashed? Carefully, He began to clear the debris. Brittle twigs snapped, giving way to larger hunks of punky wood. His movements, precise and deliberate, honoured the fragile mystery within. A cooler draught emerged from the opening, carrying the faint, earthy perfume of damp soil and decaying timber. Lily nudged his arm with her wet nose, a soft whine escaping her. Encouragement, a shared purpose. He met her gaze, a silent pact passing between them. As he widened the breach, peeling back a particularly stubborn sheet of bark, the faint squeaks swelled into a tiny, urgent chorus. His heart hammered, a mix of apprehension and burgeoning responsibility. He peered into the gloom, eyes straining to discern shapes in the dim light filtering into the hollow. It was a darker, more cavernous space than he'd anticipated. Then he saw them, a small, chaotic mound of pink. Tiny, hairless forms, no larger than his thumb, writhing blindly against each other, miniature mouths agape, emitting those heart-wrenching peals. They clustered tightly, a vulnerable knot, exposed and utterly helpless. His breath caught. Not one, but several. A family. His mind pieced together the grim tableau. The storm, the plummeting tree, the hollow trunk transformed from nursery to potential tomb. These were not mere creatures. They were infants, newborns perhaps, their eyes yet sealed, their movements uncoordinated and frantic. Utterly dependent, their survival hung by the merest thread. A profound sadness settled in his chest, a heavy weight. These nascent lives, brimming with potential, now teetered on oblivion, casualties of an indifferent force. He envisioned their mother, frantically searching, her cries lost in the storm's fury. The thought constricted his throat. How long had they been trapped? How much time remained? Lily, sensing his mood shift, rested her head on his shoulder, a soft sigh escaping her. He stroked her fur, finding solace in her steady presence. She had known. She had divined the urgency when he, oblivious, had been ensnared in life's mundane rhythm. His years of teaching, of cultivating an appreciation for nature's delicate balance, now converged in this poignant moment. This wasn't a textbook lesson. It was raw, precarious life unfolding before him. He knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within, that retreat was unthinkable. These tiny trapped beings, orphaned by circumstance, now depended on him, on them both. The quiet afternoon, once destined for a leisurely read and a cup of tea, had transformed into something far more significant. The rescue wasn't just about freeing them, it was about honouring the forest's silent plea, his loyal companion's unwavering instinct, and the humbling responsibility one living creature owed another. The air grew colder as the sun dipped, casting long purple fingers across the forest floor. Time, he realised with a jolt, was running out. The challenge of rescue. Arthur knelt, his knees protesting slightly against the damp earth. The opening into the hollowed trunk, which had seemed so inviting to Lily's determined nose, now appeared an impossibly cruel mockery. It was a jagged tear in the ancient wood, roughly triangular, no bigger than his outstretched hand. He peered into the gloom, a cold dread coiling in his stomach. The air inside was still and heavy, carrying the faint, sweet scent of damp earth, and something else, something small and fragile. He extended a tentative hand, his fingers brushing against the splintered edge of the opening. The wood was raw and unforgiving, sharp enough to flay skin, let alone the delicate fur of a newborn creature. He imagined the terror of those tiny bodies, scraped and snagged as they struggled against such an exit. Reaching in further, his forearm scraped uncomfortably against the rough interior. He could feel the cold, slick surface of the hollow, but his fingers met only empty air. A vast, dark cavern beyond the immediate opening. He twisted his hand, trying to angle his wrist to gain a few precious inches, but it was no use. The angle was all wrong, the space too constricting. "Oh, you poor things," he murmured, withdrawing his hand, a frustrated sigh escaping his lips. He glanced at Lily, who sat patiently beside him, her tail thumping a soft rhythmic beat against the fallen leaves. Her golden eyes, usually brimming with playful mischief, were now locked on the dark aperture, a profound concern etched into her otherwise serene expression. A low whine rumbled in her chest, a soft, almost imperceptible sound that spoke volumes of her understanding. It wasn't a demand, but a quiet, unwavering encouragement, a testament to her steadfast belief in his ability to make things right. Arthur stood, pacing a short circle around the base of the fallen giant. The sheer immensity of the oak, even in its horizontal state, was daunting. The roots, torn from the earth, stood like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky, caked with rich, dark soil. The trunk itself, a gnarled, powerful cylinder, stretched for dozens of feet, its bark a mosaic of deep furrows and lichen. There had to be another way in. There just had to be. He ran his hands along the bark, searching for any other weakness, any crack or fissure that might offer a less perilous entry point. But the storm, in its brutal efficiency, had created only this one singular breach. The rest of the tree was solid, impenetrable. He imagined trying to widen the opening with his bare hands, a futile and dangerous endeavour. He wasn't a lumberjack, nor did he possess any tools that could safely and precisely carve away the ancient wood without causing further harm. Lily, sensing his growing frustration, nudged his hand with her wet nose. He looked down at her, seeing the unwavering hope in her gaze. She knew. She understood the stakes. Her quiet presence was a constant reminder that retreat was not an option. He knelt again, peering into the opening. The faint cries were still there, a thin, reedy symphony of distress. He felt a surge of protectiveness, a fierce determination to overcome this obstacle. He couldn't leave them, not after Lily had gone to such lengths to show him their plight. He tried again, pushing his hand further, ignoring the uncomfortable pressure against his arm. His fingers grazed something soft, something warm. Hope flared, quickly extinguished as his knuckles brushed against the sharp, inward-jutting splinters. The last thing they needed was a clumsy attempt that resulted in more injury. "It's too small, girl," he whispered to Lily, his voice thick with concern. "And it's like a trap itself." Lily responded with another soft whine, her head cocked slightly, as if offering a solution he couldn't quite grasp. Her gaze shifted from the opening to his face, then back to the tree, a clear message in her eyes. Keep trying, don't give up. He sat back on his heels, surveying the scene. The sun, now higher in the sky, dappled through the leaves, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow on the forest floor. The serene beauty of the woods felt almost ironic, a stark contrast to the hidden struggle within the tree. He considered his options, weighing the risks. He had no tools, no expertise in tree felling or animal rescue. He was just Arthur, a retired teacher, out for a walk with his dog. Yet, in this moment, he was their only hope. The helplessness of the situation was a bitter pill to swallow, but Lily's unwavering faith, her quiet resolve, spurred him on. He had to think, to truly think, beyond his immediate limitations. There had to be a way to reach them, to guide them, safely, out of their dark prison. The challenge was immense, but the cries from within the oak were a constant, piercing reminder of the urgent need for a solution. A plan and a saw. Arthur's fingers, still raw from his earlier futile attempts, traced the jagged edges of the splintered wood. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, now carried a faint, almost imperceptible squeaking from within the hollow. Lily, her gaze unwavering, nudged his hand with her wet nose, a soft whimper rumbling in her chest. Her patience was a bottomless well, but even Arthur could sense the escalating urgency in her silent pleas. He sighed, the sound a ragged whisper against the forest's hush. He had come woefully unprepared for a rescue mission. His usual hike gear, water bottle, binoculars, a well-thumbed bird guide, offered little in the way of structural demolition. He closed his eyes, picturing the contents of his worn canvas backpack, a familiar weight against his shoulders. Think, Arthur, think. He mentally catalogued each item, a mental inventory that usually served to soothe him. Snack bar, spare socks, a small first aid kit. And then it hit him. A spark of memory, a forgotten practicality. Deep within one of the side pockets, tucked away beneath a folded rain poncho, was a small, folding hand saw. He'd packed it months ago for a projected trail maintenance day that had never materialized. A just-in-case item he'd forgotten entirely. Hope, a fragile, tentative thing, flickered. He fumbled with the zipper, his movements suddenly infused with a new purpose. The saw, its teeth glinting dully in the filtered sunlight, felt impossibly small in his hand. It was hardly a lumberjack's tool, more suited for pruning stubborn branches than tackling a fallen oak. But it was something, and in this moment, something was everything. Lily watched his every move, her tail thumping a soft rhythm against the mossy ground. Her anticipation was a palpable thing, a silent current flowing between them. Arthur knelt, carefully assessing the damage. The opening, though too constricted for his hand, was still a weakness in the colossal trunk. He needed to widen it, but not carelessly. The wood, already fractured, could easily splinter further, collapsing inward and crushing whatever delicate lives lay within. This wasn't a job for brute force. It required surgical precision, a delicate dance between necessity and caution. He positioned the blade against a protruding shard of wood, his breath held. The wood, surprisingly resilient, offered initial resistance. He applied gentle, even pressure, letting the saw's teeth do the work. The rasping sound, surprisingly loud in the quiet forest, felt like a violation of the natural peace. He sawed slowly, methodically, his gaze fixed on the blade, then darting to the murky depths of the hollow. He imagined the tiny, vulnerable bodies huddled together, their small hearts beating a frantic tattoo against the rough bark. Sawdust, fine and pale, dusted his sleeves. Each stroke was an exercise in patience. He worked around the existing fractures, trying to extend them outward rather than create new, unpredictable breaks. The wood, dense and ancient, gave way grudgingly, a groan echoing through the trunk with every successful cut. He kept Lily in his peripheral vision, her watchful presence a constant reminder of the stakes. She occasionally let out a soft whine, a low, guttural sound that Arthur interpreted as either encouragement or a plea for him to hurry. His arms ached, a dull throb spreading from his shoulders to his fingertips. Sweat beaded on his forehead, trickling down his temples. This was more than physical exertion. It was a mental battle against his own impatience, against the fear of causing more harm than good. He focused on the rhythm of the saw, the slow, deliberate progression of each cut. He could feel the wood yielding, tiny vibrations travelling up the handle and into his hands. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a section of the splintered wood gave way with a soft crack, falling inward with a muffled thud. He peered into the newly enlarged opening. It was still dark, but a sliver of light now pierced deeper, revealing a clearer view of the interior. He could still hear the faint squeaking, but now a distinct, tiny tremor of movement was visible in the shadows. He wasn't quite there yet, but the path was becoming clearer. The saw, though small, had carved a sliver of hope from the imposing oak. Arthur took a deep, shuddering breath, his heart pounding with a mixture of exhaustion and renewed determination. Lily, sensing the shift, let out a soft, satisfied sigh, nudging his hand once more. Her eyes, filled with an ancient wisdom, seemed to say, "Good, Arthur. Now, keep going." He knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that he would. Freedom for the frightened. The saw, now a familiar extension of his arm, hummed with a rhythm Arthur had mastered. With each careful cut, the wood groaned, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the trunk and up into his hands. Lily, perched on her haunches a few feet away, watched with unwavering intensity, her tail giving a tiny, almost imperceptible twitch with every successful stroke. The gap he'd been meticulously widening was finally reaching a critical point. He could feel the resistance lessening, the splintered edges threatening to give way. Then, with a final protesting crack that echoed through the quiet woods, a large section of the rotted oak trunk groaned and tore free. It didn't fall cleanly, but rather peeled away like a loose flap of bark, revealing a dark, cavernous space within. A rush of damp, earthy air, thick with the scent of decaying wood, and something else, something small and alive, wafted out. Arthur's breath hitched. There, huddled together in a tight, trembling knot at the very bottom of the hollow, were 5 tiny forms. They were smaller than he'd imagined, mere bundles of damp, grey fur, their eyes still sealed shut, their minuscule bodies shivering uncontrollably. Let out a soft whine, a sound of deep empathy that pulled at Arthur's heart. He saw the frantic movement of their tiny claws, scrabbling against each other in their fear, trying to burrow deeper into the wood dust and debris at the bottom of their impromptu prison. He felt a sudden, fierce protectiveness rise within him, pushing aside his earlier hesitation. These weren't just little ones anymore. They were individual, helpless creatures, and they needed him. "Easy, little ones," he murmured, his voice a low, soothing rumble, though he knew they couldn't understand. He peeled off his worn wool hat, the one he'd inherited from his own grandfather, and carefully laid it on the mossy ground beside him. It was soft, warm, and smelled faintly of cedar and his own familiar scent. A small island of comfort in their terrifying world. He knelt, bringing his face closer to the opening, trying to assess the best way to reach them without causing further distress. The floor of the hollow was a good foot below the new opening, and the sides were slick with moisture. He extended a hand, palm open, fingers gently wiggling, trying to coax one of them closer. They only cringed further, their squeaks intensifying. Lily nudged his elbow with her nose, a silent encouragement. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. Delicacy was paramount. He carefully lowered his hand, palm up, into the hollow, his fingers spread wide. He moved slowly, deliberately, not wanting to startle them further. The closest one, a tiny ball of grey fluff, was pressed against its siblings. With infinite patience, Arthur nudged it gently with the tip of his finger, encouraging it to move onto his palm. It hesitated, trembling. Then, as if sensing the warmth, it scrambled onto his hand. Its weight was almost imperceptible, a mere feather-light tremor against his skin. Its tiny claws, sharp as needles, pricked him faintly as it clung on. He carefully lifted his hand, bringing the minuscule creature out into the dappled sunlight. It continued to shiver, its eyes, though still closed, seemingly darting beneath their lids. He gently deposited it into the soft wool of his hat. It immediately burrowed into the fabric, seeking warmth and darkness. Lily leaned forward, sniffing cautiously at the hat, then looked back at Arthur with an approving gaze. One by one, Arthur repeated the delicate process. Each rescue was a slow, painstaking ballet of gentle persuasion and steady hands. The second one was a little easier. The third seemed to sense the warmth of the hat and moved more readily. By the time he had scooped out the fourth, a small, pink-nosed creature that let out a surprisingly loud squeal as it was lifted, a sense of quiet triumph began to settle over him. The fifth and final baby squirrel was the most timid, tucked deep beneath a root. Arthur had to reach in further, his arm disappearing almost to the elbow. He felt its frantic heartbeat against his finger as he carefully dislodged it. Finally, he had all five nestled together in the soft confines of his hat, a quivering, whimpering heap of new life. He looked down at them, a profound sense of awe washing over him. Their small bodies, so fragile, so dependent. And then he looked at Lily, who was now sitting calmly beside the hat, her tail giving a soft, contented thump against the moss. Her eyes, intelligent and knowing, seemed to hold a silent message. "Good job, Arthur. We did it." The hollow, once filled with desperate cries, was now silent. The forest, which had felt so indifferent moments before, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Arthur gently picked up the hat, cradling it in his arms, as if it held the most precious jewels. To safety had only just begun. A call for help, With the last tiny squirrel nestled gently amongst its siblings, Arthur let out a long, slow breath. The hat, now a makeshift nursery, pulsed with the faint, synchronized shivers of 5 fragile lives. Lily, who had been a silent sentinel throughout the delicate extraction, finally stirred. She approached the hat with an almost reverent slowness, her nose twitching as she inhaled the unfamiliar scent of damp fur and fear. Her tail, which had been perfectly still, now began a slow, deliberate wag, a gentle rhythm of approval and calm concern. She nudged the brim of the hat softly with her wet nose, a soft whine escaping her throat. A sound so tender it brought a fresh wave of emotion to Arthur. "They're safe now, girl," Arthur murmured, stroking her head. "All thanks to you." Lily responded with a lick to his hand, then settled herself beside the hat, her chin resting on her paws, her amber eyes fixed on the small, quivering bundle within. She looked like a furry guardian, fiercely protective of her discovery. The sun, having crept higher, now dappled through the remaining leaves, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow over the unexpected tableau. The air, though still carrying the chill of the morning, felt lighter, imbued with a quiet sense of triumph. Arthur knew this was only the first step. These tiny creatures, blind and helpless, needed more than just a safe haven in his hat. They needed warmth, nourishment, and expert care. His mind, still buzzing from the adrenaline of the rescue, raced through possibilities. He wasn't equipped for this. His decades of teaching children about flora and fauna had given him knowledge, but not the practical skills for neonatal squirrel care. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out his weathered flip phone. The screen, cracked in one corner from an ancient tumble, still glowed reliably. He scrolled through his contacts, his thumb hovering over an entry he hadn't used in years. Wildlife Rescue, Henderson. He remembered meeting the woman, Sarah, at a local nature fair many years ago. She had given a fascinating talk on rehabilitating injured birds. He pressed the call button, the low hum of the dial tone sounding surprisingly loud in the hushed clearing. It rang several times, each one stretching the growing tension in Arthur's chest. Just as he was about to give up, a warm, slightly breathless voice answered. "Henderson Wildlife Rehabilitation, Sarah speaking." "Sarah, it's Arthur Henderson," he began, his voice a little shaky with lingering excitement and apprehension. I have a bit of an emergency, a rather unusual one." He explained the situation, detailing Lily's persistent nudging, the fallen oak, the precise moment he'd seen the first twitch of fur, the 5 tiny bodies nestled in the decaying wood. He described their blindness, their shivering, the profound sense of responsibility that had settled over him as he scooped them, one by one, into his hat. Sarah listened patiently, interjecting only with soft murmurs of understanding. When he finished, there was a brief silence on the line. Then she spoke, her voice calm and reassuring. "Arthur, thank you for calling. You did exactly the right thing. Those poor little things are incredibly vulnerable at that age. Blind, no fur. They wouldn't last long out in the open." A wave of relief washed over Arthur, loosening the knot in his shoulders. "So, you can help them?" "Absolutely," she confirmed. "That's what we're here for. Can you tell me your location? I'll come to you. It's best not to move them more than necessary, especially when they're so young and fragile." Arthur gave her his coordinates, describing the distinctive old oak and the winding path that led to it. He could hear the rustle of papers in the background on Sarah's end. "I'll be there as soon as I can, probably within the hour," she said. "In the meantime, keep them warm. A warm water bottle wrapped in a towel, or even just your body heat, would be ideal, and try to keep them as quiet as possible." "Will do," Arthur promised, feeling a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Sarah. Truly." He ended the call, the silence of the forest once again settling around them. He looked down at the hat. The squirrels, sensing the cessation of activity, had quieted slightly, their tiny bodies forming a living knot of fur and warmth. Lily, still vigilant, glanced up at him, her eyes conveying a silent question. "Help is coming, girl," Arthur told her, patting her head. "A kind woman is on her way to take care of them." He carefully removed his old wool scarf and gently draped it over the hat, creating a soft, warm tent for the babies. He then sat down beside Lily, leaning against the rough bark of the fallen oak. The chill in the air no longer bothered him. His own body heat, radiating into the hat, was now dedicated to these unexpected charges. He watched Lily, who had now stretched out fully, her head still close to the hat. Her ears occasionally twitched, listening to the subtle sounds of the forest. But her gaze remained fixed on the precious cargo. She had started this, Arthur mused. With her insistent tugs and whimpers, she had led him to a hidden sorrow, and now, with an almost maternal tenderness, she was overseeing its resolution. A profound connection, stronger than he'd ever imagined, bound them all together in this quiet corner of the woods. The call for help had been answered, and now all that remained was to wait. The guardian dog. The late afternoon sun, now a muted gold, slanted through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the checkered linoleum. Arthur, perched on a stool by the phone, spoke in hushed tones to Sarah, relaying the extraordinary events of the past hour. Lily, meanwhile, had settled herself with an almost regal air beside the overturned tweed hat. Her large, intelligent eyes, usually alight with an eager curiosity, were now fixed with an unwavering intensity on the small, furry bundles nestled within. She lay on her side, her muscular frame a picture of quiet vigilance. Her head, heavy with the weight of her protective instinct, rested gently on the cool kitchen floor, just inches from the brim of the hat. The faint, almost imperceptible rise and fall of her chest was the only indication of her breathing. Every now and then, a tiny, blind squirrel would stir, its minuscule paws flailing aimlessly in the soft tweed. At each movement, Lily's ears would twitch, swivelling slightly, as if straining to catch the faintest whisper of distress. There was no barking, no agitated whining, just a profound, silent attentiveness. Arthur, having finished his call, hung up the phone with a soft click. He watched Lily for a moment, a slow smile spreading across his face. "She'll be here in about 20 minutes, girl," he murmured, his voice gentle. Lily offered no acknowledgement beyond a brief flicker of her gaze towards him, her focus immediately returning to her charges. It was as if she understood the fragile nature of their existence, the precariousness of their survival. He moved quietly, pulling out a chair at the kitchen table, careful not to disturb the solemn tableau. He poured himself a glass of water, the clinking of ice cubes sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. The adrenaline that had surged through him during the rescue was now slowly ebbing, leaving behind a profound sense of exhaustion and a lingering awe. He'd seen Lily's intelligence before, her uncanny ability to understand his moods, her intuitive grasp of commands. But this was different. This was a depth of empathy, a proactive heroism he hadn't fully appreciated. He watched her, truly watched her, seeing the subtle nuances of her protective stance. Her brow was furrowed slightly, a faint line of concern etched between her eyes. Her tail, usually a lively pendulum of joy, lay still, curled loosely around her hindquarters. It was clear she felt the weight of her responsibility, the urgency of the situation. He remembered her frantic barks at the fallen oak, her insistent nudges, her desperate glances back at him. She hadn't been chasing a squirrel. She had been trying to save them. A shiver ran down his spine, a mixture of wonder and a slight prickle of shame. He, the supposedly intelligent human, had been so slow to grasp the truth. He, with all his years of experience and knowledge, had needed his dog to show him the way, to lead him to a hidden plight he would have otherwise overlooked. Lily, the silent guardian, had been the true hero of this unfolding drama. One of the squirrels emitted a faint, high-pitched squeak, a sound so small it was almost swallowed by the silence of the kitchen. Lily's head lifted fractionally, her nose twitching. She nudged the hat ever so gently with her snout, a soft, encouraging gesture, as if to say, "Don't worry, I'm here." It was an act of pure, unadulterated tenderness, devoid of any expectation or desire for reward. Arthur found himself mesmerized. He had always thought of Lily as his companion, his loyal friend. Now, he saw her as something more profound, a creature of instinctual wisdom, a benevolent force of nature. She embodied a selfless care that transcended species, a bond that reached across the divide between human and animal. The kitchen, usually a place of predictable routine, felt charged with a new significance. The soft glow of the setting sun, the faint chirping of crickets filtering in from outside, the hushed breathing of the dog, and the tiny squeaks of the squirrels. It all wove together into a tapestry of quiet, unexpected beauty. He thought of the years he'd spent teaching, trying to instill in his students a respect for the natural world. He'd lectured on ecosystems, on the interconnectedness of life. Yet here, in his own kitchen, Lily was demonstrating it more powerfully than any textbook ever could. She was a living lesson, a testament to the inherent goodness that existed in the world, often overlooked in the hurried pace of human life. The minutes ticked by, each one filled with Lily's unwavering vigil. Her eyes, dark and luminous, never strayed from the hat. She was a statue of devotion, a sentinel of hope. Arthur knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that these little ones, blind and vulnerable, were safe under her watchful gaze. They had found their guardian, and she, in turn, had found her mission. He reached out a hand, slowly, carefully, and rested it on Lily's warm fur. Her tail gave a single soft thump against the floor, a subtle acknowledgement of his presence, but her eyes remained fixed. He felt the steady beat of her heart beneath his palm, a rhythmic pulse of life and protection. In that moment, he understood that the rescue wasn't truly over. Not yet. Not until Sarah arrived. Not until these fragile lives were truly out of danger. And Lily, his extraordinary dog, understood it too. She would not rest until her precious discovery was safe.